So here we are upstairs in the rather plush surroundings of Waterstone's rather nice, elegant cocktail bar and restaurant, which if you're ever in London, it's really worth coming to have a look. Not a lot of people know it's here. It's kind of a well-kept secret. And here we are with Tim. So, Tim, thanks for your time. It's great to see you. Now, you're back from Australia. How long are you back for?
Just for about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks.
Have you brought the family?
On holiday,
Is this a private visit or is
it's
it
a private visit?
Super sleuth visit?
No, it's a private visit, and we've had the most wonderful time. Weather, cricket, fantastic.
Well, you certainly bought the Australian weather back.
Yes, no, so Australia at the moment, Sydney, where we're living, is winter. It's actually pretty warm, but not like this.
Right, now, last time I saw you, I interviewed you in a car park.
Yes.
In a hotel.
That's right.
In Australia, in the dark, I think.
That's right.
Because we were in a rush to get away.
That's it.
And you just, you were on the sort of cusp of introducing this rather clever new way of Australians accessing their healthcare. Now, just bring us up to date with what the idea was, and then let's talk about how you've got on and how you've managed to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So for some years ago, the Australian government put in place legislation that essentially gave people the ability to control access to their summary medical information, and they put in place a program called the My Health Record back in 2012. And the idea was, at this point, the program was opt-in, voluntary, that if people wanted to have online mobile access to their medical information, they could choose to do so. Like many technology programs in England, in Australia, elsewhere, it was a bit slower in its implementation than perhaps it could have been. And in 2017, the Australian government decided to move the program to opt out, so that everybody would have one unless they chose not to do so. And that was the challenge that I was set when I was asked to become Chief Executive of the Australian Digital Health Agency. And this program, the My Health Record program, is one of the 7 priorities of the new Australian Digital Health Strategy. So we have been working for the last 3 years or so to put in place this mobile record for Australians. And
can I just ask you there? So when you, the mobile record, it was based on the existing health record.
So the clever thing,
I was going to say, how did you do the software?
So the clever thing is that obviously there are lots of different sources of medical information for people in Australia, just as there are here. You have your lab test results, you have your hospital, your general practice, and so on. So the clever thing was that the Australian government had put in place some technology which allowed different sources of data to upload into a central national repository, and that repository could then be made available the individual records can be made available.
Right, so just to understand that, so GP records, for example, where you came out of the back of the GP records and uploaded, you took hospital records and uploaded.
So to be absolutely explicit, the My Health Record contains a summary of the general practice record. Right. It contains the discharge summary from the hospital. It contains actually quite comprehensive information from the community pharmacy, so medicines you've been dispensed. It contains prescription information. It contains information from the pathology laboratory and radiology laboratory, all different sources of content, and it uploads that information into your health account, the My Health Record. It's a summary of health information, but it's quite a comprehensive summary.
And that's called My Health Record.
And it's called My Health Record.
Right.
And in the program to move it to national opt-out started in July of 2018.
And I think there was a bit of furore about press.
There was up until July 20, about 6.4 million Australians had elected to have a My Health Record. So they had, in one way or another,
how many?
25. So the country, 25 million people.
Right.
So
just under a third.
Yeah, had sort of elected one way or another to have a My Health Record. The clinical community and its leadership, the Australian Medical Association, the Royal Australian College of GPs, had called for movement to national opt-out because they wanted it to be a routine part of the clinical workflow, and in that way to become an important asset to clinicians in decision-making, particularly in reducing medication error. Because in Australia, just like some parts of England, people are very dependent on paper and the fax machine, and if they don't have the recent history of a person's medicines, are at risk of prescribing medicines to which they, for example, might be allergic or have some other contraindication. So having seamless access to medicines information is one very big use case for the My Health Record. There are others, of course, but that was one of them. So the clinical community wanted it to move to opt-out. Government funded that. And July 2018, the campaign to alert the population as a whole, people in Australia, to their rights to opt out started. Now,
and that was on the press and television as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
big campaign.
Big campaign. And what followed was, I think, a very important debate for Australia, and indeed a debate that I'm really happy has happened a little bit in England already, but is one that I think is tremendously important given our digital circumstances.
I mean, I'm not trying to lure you into into something controversial, but I mean, we haven't got anywhere near that debate yet. We've got a lot of people who are very worried about data and access to data, and is it going to be sold and what's going to happen. And you've probably seen that we've just done a deal here with Alexa and Amazon, where Amazon is giving access to the NHS website. It doesn't involve collecting data.
No.
A lot of people are very worried about it. So the fact you're able to overcome that in Australia will be of interest to people here.
Well, I think it was more, I'm not sure whether it's something to overcome. It's more that what you're trying to do, and it's a long-term objective, is to ensure as far as possible that people in the community are able to make their own decision. So you don't have to have a My Health Record, and you may choose not to have one because you're concerned about, say, the risk of it being hacked. Actually, it's got a very solid security record, but obviously those risks can't be denied. And so the important thing for this campaign was to really just create awareness amongst Australians and those resident in Australia that they had these rights to opt out if they chose to, or if they chose to have a My Health Record, that actually the legislation gives them rights to decide who sees it. So they can put a PIN number on it, they can decide which documents are visible to which doctors.
That's the important point, because that's something else that we won't get immediately here. So just take us through the PIN number bit.
Yes, so actually let me quickly go back. So July the campaign started, February the 22nd, records were created for roughly 90% of Australians.
How did that go?
I'm very glad to say without a hitch,
really?
No technical issues, no. So 23 million records or thereabouts were created. Minus the 6, of course, that had previously existed, but and about 10% of the Australian community chose not to have one, so they opted out of the My Health Record. And now you can, at any point, decide to permanently delete your My Health Record, so you can literally erase it, or you can choose, if you've done that, to opt back in again. So now
10% is pretty good, isn't it? In the expectations of opt-outs. When we tried it here, we were around that, I think 9%, 8%.
Well, I think the thing for me was never that this is about primary. Initially, of course, it has great potential future advantage for analytics, research and so on. But the primary purpose of the My Health Record is to support, primary medical application. So really the rate of opt-out was never a success factor. It was really to do with making sure that people were aware of their rights, and if they wished to, had exercised them. So that's where we're at now. So we have broadly about 90% of the Australian community with a My Health Record, and already you can start seeing, the benefits being realised. It's a very humdrum sort of story, this, but just to quickly tell you, I was in a pharmacy in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, about a couple of hours south of Sydney, over the Easter weekend, and on the Monday actually working, and the pharmacist told me that they'd had an elderly chap who's quite a regular customer come in, having been discharged from hospital on the Saturday. He'd opened up over the weekend for his regular customers. Now this chap could remember he'd been discharged from hospital, and the doctors he'd been treating him had told him not to take the little red pill. That's all he could remember. He'd got what in Australia is called a Webster pack, which is that pack of medicines that is filled by the pharmacist, so that it's lunch, breakfast, dinner by day, and it's intended to help you, of course, take your medicines appropriately. So he brought in the Webster pack, and the pharmacist was filling it, and all he could remember was don't take the red pill. Now, he'd had an upper GI bleed, and this little red pill turned out to be rather a nasty blood thinner, so exactly, very good he remembered that one. But his pharmacist was very excited because he had been able to look up the gentleman's miles record and had found the discharge summary from the hospital on it. Then this is a revelation in a very modern country, just almost the first time he'd ever seen a discharge summary, electronically available to him. And he'd noticed that not just the little red pill, but 6 other pills the doctors in that hospital had told this gentleman not to take. Now, who knows, but the pharmacist's view was that if the gentleman had continued to take those pills, because he hadn't got his discharge summary, and the pharmacist had dispensed them to him, that he would have been in considerable risk and may well have been readmitted to hospital. And it's those kinds of instances, which is what this whole digital information sharing opportunity is all about.
Well, exactly, because we got doctors now flying blind, they don't know who's on what, and you get elderly people that come into A&E late at night, multi-morbidity, know they're going to have COPD, they know they're likely to be diabetic, they know they're likely to have all sorts, and who knows what they are.
So I think
I
it's
can absolutely see. What interests me, Tim, is like how this got done, because we're perfectly capable of doing it here.
Yeah.
What was the difference between Australia and how did it get done?
Well,
in
England,
Australia?
of course. Well, it's a very important question because obviously I arrived after the legislation had been enacted, which provide the rights for people to control who sees their miles record and so on. That was done back in 2012, and honestly, I say it out loud. I was giving an address at the National Press Club in Canberra before we started opt-out. I personally think that the Australian legislators did a very far-sighted thing. They recognise that in this digital age in which we live, people will want the right to control who sees their medical information. They put in place a very robust framework for protecting people's rights. That was actually, the strength of that was increased during the debate over the opt-out for miles record last year. So I think Australia's got a very strong legal basis now for taking advantage of digital health in the future.
It was a political decision.
Well, it was one that was supported by all the political parties in Australia at the time it was legislated.
Whose idea was it? Did it just emerge, or did it come from a single person?
I don't know actually. It feels as if, from what I understand, that it was a cross-party political consensus to try and, in the same way as the banking and travel industries have done, to give people much more empowered control over their healthcare through digital healthcare.
It's, as you've just said, you've given us the story of the pharmacist.
Yeah.
It's safety.
It's safety. And look, everything I'm hearing, and obviously stay in touch with people in the UK or in the English Health Service, I think there are all sorts of ways in which the priority, the opportunity for digital technology to support safer services is being realised.
Well, the Secretary of State is very keen on digital stuff, that's for sure. Yeah. We've now taken a large chunk of NHS Digital and put it into NHSX, which is actually a sort of a side. I don't know quite how to describe it. A department of the Department of Health, and I'm not sure it has any actual legal standing, but it's been set up and it's been funded, I think, essentially from the DH, which has taken it away from NHS Digital, which is as you know yourself, it's a very large, sprawling organisation responsible for everything from cyber security through to what gets plugged in. So taking out that sort of innovative bit and focusing on it, we're all hopeful that it will bring some changes.
NHS Digital, so I spend a lot of time with colleagues in different countries. We pool information a lot about how we can improve implementation of digital services in healthcare. And I've got to say, NHS Digital has a very strong reputation for delivering some of the world's most robust digital services. And you think of the spine, for example. Australia doesn't have a spine.
No.
So England's got the spine run by NHS Digital, which is just a marvellous piece of vital infrastructure, ensuring that the right information hits the right doctor or nurse, registered clinician, as appropriate. Now, we're building a similar service in Australia, very much looking to the English NHS and the work that NHS Digital has done. So my view is that very much different countries have, obviously for all the reasons you'd expect, have ended up all moving towards the same goal, which is ultimately to have connected healthcare, properly taking advantage of digital information services, but often doing so with coming at it from slightly different angles. So it just so happens that Australia has prioritised in its journey the consumer mobile record.
I don't know anywhere else that's done that. Is there another country that's that far advanced?
Yes, not of Australia's scale. So Australia's the largest country to have introduced a mobile health record of this kind, which also over which the citizen has control. But the Nordic countries very largely have introduced similar mechanisms for giving people access to the health information, and so too has Austria actually recently too. And a lot of countries are now looking at the Australian example and those others to work out what sort of legislative framework may be the right one for their own particular context. But I think we can all see how increasingly the implementation of digital is accelerating, and as I say, different countries bring different priorities to bear. But I wouldn't underestimate at all the achievements that the NHS has made in bringing digital benefits to bear on clinical safety. Yeah.
I think we're struggling with interoperability, to be honest.
Well, so too is everyone.
Interoperability with the kits and interoperability of data and the use of data.
Well, again, I mean, the work that's been done here on the global digital exemplars, I think, has been pretty field leading. Everybody is struggling with interoperability in the sense that putting in place standards-based information sharing is not straightforward. And the technology in many ways is the least important bit of it. The most important bit, I think, is just the change and adoption, supporting the clinical community to work it through their own workflow. These are very complex cultural challenges which every country I work with is dealing with. But I think what I sense is as the political priority becomes more focused on this, I think I really, obviously here it's very focused on getting connected healthcare working, same too in Australia. Other countries like India, Indonesia are also very much prioritising it. I remain increasingly optimistic that the benefits will be realised sooner perhaps than we might think.
Well, hopefully we're on the cusp of it. I mean, at the moment everything's preoccupied about Brexit, but once we get that out of the way, we might be able to get back to business as usual. Tim, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Enjoy your time here. Please stay because you've brought the sunshine. And it's great to talk to you and hear about your great successes. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you.